And I hope that the rest of you are enjoying yourself as much as I'm enjoying myself.
Y espero que todos ustedes estén disfrutando esto tanto como yo lo estoy disfrutando.
So I'm just going to give a very brief context, and then the bulk, most of this evening will be taken up with a conversation between Akupa and myself.
Y voy a dar un poquito de contexto y después, bueno, la mayor parte de la sesión de esta tarde va a ser una conversación entre Akupa y yo.
Y después terminaremos. Sorry,
In
I
English para
keep
mí.
my head has gone completely. Okay, and then I'd like to finish with a meditation and play the video again that we played last night.
Y después quiero terminar con una meditación y mostrarles el video que vimos anoche,
Because I think it was a nice way to finish the third session of the day.
porque creo que fue una forma muy bonita de terminar la tercera sesión del día.
So today and over the next few days, we're exploring some of the themes from the talk Evolution or Extinction.
Hoy estamos explorando algunos de los temas de una charla que se llama Evolución o Extinción.
So I'm sure by this time everybody's aware that that talk is available on the resources page of our website, the retreat website.
Creo que para ahorita ya todo mundo tiene conciencia de que esa charla está disponible en la página de recursos de nuestro sitio de internet para este retiro.
And I do mention on the resources page why I was so keen to include this talk.
Y ahí en la página de recursos menciono por qué me pareció tan importante, por qué tenía tantas ganas de introducir esta plática en este retiro.
And there are four things in the talk that Sangharakshita suggests that we can do.
Y hay cuatro cosas que Sangharakshita dice en esta charla que podemos hacer.
And today and the next 3 days, we're exploring those four elements of the talk, the four suggestions.
Y hoy y los siguientes 3 días vamos a estar explorando precisamente estos cuatro elementos que aparecen como sugerencias en esa charla.
So today we're focusing on the theme of a method of personal development.
Entonces el día de hoy nos estamos enfocando en el tema de un método de desarrollo personal.
Tomorrow we'll be looking at creating community.
Mañana vamos a estar reflexionando sobre cómo crear comunidad.
And then we'll talk about the next day will be how do we withdraw from the forces that work against our spiritual values.
El siguiente día vamos a estar viendo algo sobre cómo retirarnos de las fuerzas que trabajan en contra de nuestra vida espiritual.
And the next day we'll look at how do we influence those situations that we can't withdraw from.
Y el último día vamos a estar viendo cómo podemos influenciar esas situaciones de las cuales no nos podemos retirar.
So this morning, Akupa helped us start to look at a method of personal development with his talk.
Entonces, esta mañana Akupa nos empezó a ayudar a explorar el tema de un método de desarrollo personal.
And in the second session, we looked a bit at how we picked up from the end of Akupa's talk and looking at how our personal practice interrelates to our activity in the world.
Y en la segunda sesión lo que hicimos fue retomar algunas cosas de ahí donde nos dejó Akupa y estuvimos viendo cómo nuestra práctica personal se tiene que ver con temas que en donde nos relacionamos con el mundo.
And this evening, we're going to have a conversation that might touch on some of these themes, but we might end up talking about something else. Who knows?
Y hoy en la tarde vamos a tener una conversación que tal vez toque alguno de esos temas, pero vamos a ver por dónde va la conversación. ¿Quién sabe?
So, to facilitate the kind of conversation, what we're going to do is we're going to ask Sadhajoti to go into the room where she can become a simultaneous translator.
Entonces, para facilitar esta conversación, vamos a pedirle a Sadayoti que se meta a este cuartito en donde va a hacer una traducción simultánea.
And those of you who would like to hear the conversation in Spanish, in a minute you'll get the opportunity to choose an interpretation room in Spanish.
Y aquellos que deseen escuchar la conversación en español, en un momento va a aparecer una opción en donde puedes picarle y entonces te vas al cuarto de interpretación en español.
Okay, so bye, Sadajoti.
Entonces, adiós, Sadayoti. Muy bien.
Okay, so the interpretation button is now available. And el botón ahora es disponible, entonces en la parte abajo de tu pantalla deberías ver donde dice Interpretation Available. Y si quieres tocar eso, y que va a salir inglés, que no lo quieren, o español, Spanish. Si lo tocas eso, podrías escuchar a Sadajoti. Yeah. Okay, so if you'd like to, I think we're highlighted, aren't we? We're spotlighted, Akupa and I.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are.
Okay. So let's have a conversation, Akupa.
Are you going to
So
start?
we have to remember to leave a space so that Sadajoti's translation, it will be obvious who's talking. So Akupa, just to begin with, just tell us a little bit about yourself, about your life now, where you live, what you do. Just give us a little bit of context of your life.
Okay, well, I'm here in Newcastle upon Tyne, in the far north of England, where it's snowing at the moment. I live in quite stop there. Do I need to pause very much? You'll have to guide me through this bit.
No, she says that's fine. You can go
Okay.
on.
Right. So I live here with my partner Yoshi, and he and I run a tea house in the middle of Newcastle. So that when it's open, that takes up some of my time. The other main thing I do with my time is help to run Newcastle Buddhist Centre, which is a short distance away. So I'm the chair of the centre, have been for quite a long time. And that's actually become, through the whole COVID thing, it's actually got busier. It's actually taken off quite a bit, which has been great, but it's also taken quite a lot of time and energy. So most of my time is spent between those two things, other than doing my laundry and taking exercise, and sometimes going to visit my 96-year-old mother who's in a care home. I try to do that as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So you, if I remember correctly, Akupa, you were ordained in the year 2000?
Yeah.
So you've been in the order for quite a while, over 20 years. But tell us a little bit about how you got involved in Buddhism and in Triratna. What were you doing before you got involved, before you became a Buddhist? Tell us a little bit about your life.
I've sort of had two things going on. One was a kind of quest for truth going on. I had been into Christianity, the Church of England, in my sort of earlier youth. then that sort of fell apart in a very positive way. And really my energy went into a career which was town planning. I worked for various local authorities, but also kind of twin track with that, I had a sort of mini local political career as well on Newcastle City Council. So I was a Labour councillor for actually, well, it was one of the most deprived districts in the whole of the UK. It was pretty challenging place to do that work.
And how long did you do that for? How long were you involved in the world of politics?
I probably did that for about 10 years, 5 of which I was actually on Newcastle Council. But before that, I'd been active in the Labour Party already for a few years, probably from the 80s.
So we have some people on the call who are not from the UK, quite a lot of people. So maybe just give a bit of context of what the Labour Party is, what kind of, maybe what it was like then would be a good start, because frankly, I think it's changed. But in the 80s, when you were active in the Labour Party, what did the Labour Party represent? What was it politically? Was it right? Was it left? Etc.
Well, it was a centre-left party, but which, in a way, I think went a bit more right-wing when Tony Blair came in, which was when I was active. There was a real desire, we had many years of the Thatcher government and the John Major government, and there was, I think, a real mood that we just needed to get into power. And even if that meant being a bit sort of dishonest, and, you know, it's the whole culture of spin, of, you know, trying to sort of twist the facts to get good publicity and so on. And I was very conscious of that. It was very much in the ethos, and I think I even got caught up in it slightly myself, even though I wasn't a great supporter of Tony Blair. I think I did get influenced by that sort of culture, you know.
So in going back a little bit, what was your motivation for getting involved in what was vaguely left-wing politics at the time?
Well, I just sort of concluded that, you know, the economy is for people, not people for the economy. The economy is there to actually, you know, give people good lives. And I'd also got really interested in, you know, through town planning, of community involvement, the whole sort of idea that rather than bureaucrats telling people what to do, that you actually, you know, find ways of like empowering people. So that was my sort of driving interest at the time. And the Labour Party at that time seemed the best sort of way of actually bringing about change. You know, I think I wanted to really, I wanted to sort of I was quite ambitious, I think. You know, I wanted to be leader of the council and completely, you know, revolutionise Newcastle and so on. Yeah.
I just went to check that Sadajyoti's following okay. Yeah, good. Okay. So Akupa, were you still involved in politics when you began to practice as a Buddhist, or, you know, what was the relationship? What was happening then in your life that, you know, you got involved in Buddhism?
Actually, there was I think a time when I got a bit disillusioned with politics and also a bit disillusioned with myself. In that I'd sort of operate within the Labour Party in Newcastle and try and be a bit clever and try and be a bit Machiavellian. And I thought that was a good thing to do. But I think one or two things had happened and I didn't feel good about myself. I'd sort of engineered somebody's downfall. And I didn't, it didn't feel like a good thing to have done. So that was going on. I had a kind of mentor at that time who was a former leader of the council, and he died around that time. And also I just it just felt like we were just, I'm sorry, this is a real cliche, but it was like rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic, that you could do some good things in local government, but you weren't really getting to the sort of root of making change in the world, I suppose. So I got a bit disillusioned. That's when I started coming to Newcastle Buddhist Centre. But actually, what was interesting, I still had another 2 or 3 years sort of actively as a local councillor. And my way of operating just naturally changed after I started meditating. That instead of trying to be clever and Blairite and Machiavellian, I just decided that I was just going to be straightforward and open. And actually I was, as a result of that, I think more effective. I was also sort of happier and got into less sort of conflict. But I think some of the, if I look back on some of the things that I'm proud to have done through that time, like got some community activity going and protecting one of our local parks from development by Newcastle United Football Club. They came out of that sort of period, really. Yeah.
So what was it that attracted you to Buddhism when you came along? Because from what I remember, you were fairly successful. You had quite a nice lifestyle. You had economic security. You had work that felt to some extent fulfilling. Even if you were a bit disillusioned, you felt you were making a difference. So what was it in Buddhism that spoke to you? Some people come into Buddhism because they're very, because they don't have a successful life, in the sense that they're seeking for something more than they have. So what was it for you that was the impetus to look for a spiritual path?
I think it had been going on in the background already, in a way. I think I'd just sort of decided, well, I didn't know what spiritual path to follow, so I just decided to try and make the world a better place. But to say that some people connect to the Dharma through meditation, some people connect to the Dharma through the Dharma ideas and so on, other people through friendship and Sangha. I think when I came along, I had all three, basically. I was just, that's why, in a way, I'm still here, all three were really strong for me. I just took to meditation straight away. It's sort of daily practice. I really loved it. It seemed to just make me so much kind of more relaxed and happy. People remarked on it. I was really into Dharma teachings that just sort of seemed to bring so much clarity and sense. And I think I'd always yearned for spiritual community and friendship. In a way, I'd had a taste of that in my sort of Christian days. And I sort of missed it a bit, I think. and so, you know, all three were on offer, and it just sort of, yeah, I just had to had to carry on, I suppose.
It's quite interesting because as you speak, I'm almost hearing those four things that Sangharakshita talks about. Like, yeah,
yeah.
you know, you found meditation, which gave you a way to work directly
Yeah.
on yourself, and you had realized there were things about yourself you weren't happy with.
Mm.
So in a way, you started working with those states. So that was the first one. And then interestingly, that community was something that obviously was important to you and that you were looking for. So that's the second thing that Sangharakshita suggested. And in a way, you started to withdraw from some of the aspects of the political world that you were living and working in, but you continued to be an influence for good as you began to have a more ethical, a more sensitivity ethically through your practice. So well done.
I mean, I do think, I mean, I, you know, then chose to just sort of quit that path altogether, and I was no longer active in the Labour Party. I don't, you know, I wouldn't rule that out as a path. It's just I felt, in a way, I had to give my
Oops.
energy to or the other. It felt what's happened.
Your internet was you're slightly cutting out there. Oops.
Okay. Yeah. Hello. I didn't think it was okay.
Okay,
Am I
try
back?
again. Yeah.
Okay. It's not that I had a view that it was impossible to follow a political path while also following a spiritual path. It was more that, in a way, to carry on doing the politics would have required so much time and energy. It was an issue of time and energy that it felt like a bit of a choice on that level rather than on the level of principle. Yeah. I felt I wanted to give more time to the Dharma. And, you know, eventually it just got to the point where the day I was on a retreat, and it really hit me that Buddhism was actually the best thing that I could do for the world. You know, one morning in meditation, it's sort of all the Dharma I'd been sort of reading. It just sort of, I kind of realized that this was the best contribution I could make. And by the end of that day, I'd written a letter asking for ordination. So in a way, that was the motivation. It was when that clicked into place that I decided that Buddhism was, in a way, the path that I really wanted to follow.
And any regrets about that?
No. No, I've never regretted that. I've never regretted it. You know, because then I gave up political career, and then I kind of gave up my professional career, which has cost me a lot of money, I suppose. But you know, I do sometimes perhaps sort of arrogantly look at the state of politics, because, you know, I'd wanted to progress. I'd wanted to maybe go into parliament and stuff like that. And you know, of course, I kind of look at what's going on nowadays, and I just think, if only I'd been there, I could have done. But of course, would I? Because I would have been a different me. You know, it would have been a different me. And actually, I think I was just, you know, I in a way, practicing the Dharma has given me certain sort of strengths and a real sort of clarity and so on. But if I'd followed the political path, then I wouldn't have that, and I'd perhaps, you know, be as sort of corrupt and ineffectual as many seem to be.
Well, I'm very glad that you did not follow that path and become corrupt and incompetent, which seems to be the combination at the moment. Okay, just letting Sadhjoti finish. Yeah. So moving ahead a little bit, a number of people have mentioned, and we mentioned this morning, that you wrote a book which is available from Windhorse, I believe, still. Yeah. And so what was the background to that? What made you think, oh, I fancy writing a book about ecology or about, the world, about the climate, about Earth? What was the background to that?
Well, although I'd been active in the Labour Party, environmental things had been very much at the sort of forefront of what I was sort of concerned about, I suppose. I studied geography at university, and in a way, we learnt about climate change back then. This was the 80s. So when I joined the Labour Party, I actually used to go around Labour Party branches talking about climate change and other environmental issues and problems with plastic pollution. And this was in the 1980s. So it was very much, it was just sort of, I don't know why, it just sort of seems to be in my DNA to be bothered about that. And I think when I got into Buddhism, I think first of all, I sort of pushed all that aside, but at some point I realized that no, I just cannot. It would be an act of betrayal almost just to not give expression to all of that. So I began to think about writing something, and Bhante had been keen for people to sort of explore that area because it wasn't one of his main sort of interests. So I felt I had this sort of blessing of Triratna to do that.
So did you have conversations at all with Bhante with Sangharakshita about that?
Yeah, one or two, not about the book, but on that sort of subject. Although really, I seem to remember his response was basically, well, just look at what I've said, look at what I've written, and actually, there's a tremendous sort of, even though it wasn't one of his main interests, there is a real sort of richness of insight into these sort of issues, into the sort of principles. Like, for example, the quite radical idea that the universe is alive, that we need to think of the universe as alive. And that's something that's, in a way, the import of that is really sort of hitting me just now, 20 years later. There's more to explore.
I'll ask you to say a bit more about that in a minute, because that sounds quite interesting. But just also to say that in that talk that we're focusing on, when Sangharakshita lists the world problems that we should be worried about or concerned about, he does actually mention in that I can't remember how he puts it, the environmental problem or something like that. So even in the 1970s and 76, when he gave that talk, he was aware of that as an issue. And it was a conversation I had with him quite a few times about, because as you know, you and I at Kupa were both quite involved in trying to bring a bit more awareness of social issues, including environmental issues, into Triratna, which wasn't always met with an open arms, which is a whole other topic really. But so I just think it's interesting that even in the 1970s, Sangharakshita was talking about that as an issue to be aware of for us. So say a bit more about what it is now that you're thinking about this idea of the universe being alive. What does that mean for you?
Well, I've just been in a way through lockdown. It suddenly occurred to me to think, well, what if we really took that seriously? You know, what if I really believed that the universe is basically alive? You know, that trees and rocks and plastic and so on. You know, let's kind of go with it. Let's see what difference that makes. So I got quite curious about other sort of approaches to animism. And I kind of did quite a lot of reading from different sort of traditions, from sort of pagan traditions and so on, about how, or, you know, people like animal whisperers, you know, people who communicate with animals, how they go about it, you know, because there seems to be some people who are able to sense that aliveness of nature. Yeah, I just got a bit interested, and then I started to, well, there was one particular time after that, you know, that main lockdown that we had, where, you know, I couldn't even get out of Newcastle. But at the end of it, as soon as it was over, I headed off to a forest in Northumberland and spent an afternoon just sitting with some trees. I was doing the elements practice, and suddenly it just came alive. Because I started playing with the idea that the earth element is alive. I think what I've struggled with the whole animism thing is the problem of belief. That you can sort of take on a belief that there are earth spirits and so on, you know, especially if you've been to Butterfield a few times. You can sort of play with that, and it's all very well. But for me, because I've also got a sort of scientific background to some degree, it also began to get a bit sort of hollow. It's like it was just play, it wasn't real. Then I suppose sitting there, it occurred to me, well, I am an earth spirit. Actually, you know, this consciousness is associated with this earth element. Likewise, I am a water spirit because this consciousness is associated with the water element here, and so on with, you know, the other physical elements. So I just started doing the elements practice in that sort of way, with metta thrown in, with love and kindness thrown in. So I just started saying, oh, I'm an earth spirit amongst earth spirits. May we all be well. It's just sort of spontaneous. And then water spirits, and then fire spirit, and air spirit, and so on. And it transformed my experience of the sort of little glade, little valley that I was in. I felt completely at one with it. It wasn't just me meditating, it was that little woodland meditating. So that it just sort of opened something up for me. I suppose I felt what you need is actually just quite a sort of playful, don't worry about belief or not belief. In a way, just sort of play with these sort of ideas, and something will open up, or begin in a small way to sort of open up, and having quite a different sort of relationship to nature.
So I'm just really enjoying a Koopa as earth spirit, a Koopa as water spirit. I'm kind of just imagining you in your glade, just being in touch with those things. It's absolutely gorgeous. I think there's something about the fact you're a big bloke, and and yet you don't mind being an earth spirit. I think there's something really rather refreshing about that. So I'm enjoying that. So does this kind of realization or this kind of way of thinking about it, does it change anything in your life? I mean, it sounds like it's had an effect on your meditation practice, but does it have an effect in any other way? I mean, like you mentioned Buddha field, is that something that you want to be more involved in, or do you have ideas about how this might affect your life?
Well, I mean, maybe Buddha field. We'll see. But yeah, as some of you know, I've been in a way through that same period of time. I've also had this idea of practice on the land and trying to encourage that to be one of the things that we do in Triratna. Partly that's a personal thing that I'd quite like to move out of the city, or at least just spend more time with nature. I did miss it during the lockdown. I miss sort of having proper forest around rather than just parks. But it's also a feeling that, in a way, one of the responses that is needed to the kind of crisis we're in is a kind of culture change, and that a spiritual practice that is rooted in an immersion in nature is actually a powerful force for change. And it's also something that could really benefit Triratna as well. I was thinking, for example, I've been looking at trying to buy some land near Newcastle as a sort of Sangha resource, a place where the Sangha can come and practice and be together, have a common project, immerse ourselves in nature, almost somewhere to sort of play, if you know what I mean. So in a way, well, all centres could do that. All centres could do that. We've got retreat centres, we've got Buddha field, and there's also already many people exploring that whole area. But maybe every centre could just have its own piece of land, which could be a little bit right livelihood, a little bit like a Buddhist centre, even a bit like a community, and so on.
So you know that land is much cheaper in Scotland.
Yeah. Although it's also getting more, I don't know, but the far north of England's, it's getting more expensive.
The same thing is happening in Scotland.
Yeah. My fear is that I've sort of missed the opportunity a little bit, but there you go. Maybe
not, but maybe you need to be thinking, don't leave it too long. Well, Akupa, that's a lot of very interesting material, but I feel I'm hogging the conversation with you. I've got the lovely opportunity to talk to you, but what I'd quite like to do, if you're okay with it, is just open it up, and we might invite Sadhajoti to come back out of her room, and we'll just all be together again in the room, and just see if anybody else there's 38, so there's around 40, because there's a couple of people that are in the same room, as it were, more than one person. But I think even with 40, we could have an opportunity for other people to ask you questions. Somebody's already jumped in. Look, Stav, who's in Sydney, has already raised their hand. So if people are okay with that, just I see you, Stav. I won't forget. If Sadhajoti feels like coming back in, then we'll close the interpretation rooms and have a bit more of a general. Is that okay, Cooper? You
Yeah.
open to having? Yeah, great. So Sangadara, if you want to, great.
Dara, si puedes hacer algo con esto.
Okay, you're back.
Estoy de regreso.
Yeah.
Muy bien.
We're all in the same room.
Ya estamos todos en el mismo cuarto.
So Akupa, thanks. That was lovely. I enjoyed that conversation. That was really lovely and lots
Gracias,
of ideas.
Akupa. Disfruté mucho esa conversación, muchas ideas interesantes.
Sadhajoti, you okay to carry on? Because that was quite intense. Yeah?
No, sí, ya, estoy contenta de seguir, claro. I just found it a little bit difficult to follow Akupa, but that had to do with a bit of echo in her mic, in his mic or something. So some of the words you said I missed, but hopefully the general idea I got.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so just before we invite Stev to come in with a question or a comment, just does everybody know how to use their digital hand? Because that is the easiest way to follow people.
Quería preguntarles antes de que vayamos con staff, quiero preguntar si todo el mundo sabe cómo usar levantar la mano digital, porque esa es la manera más fácil de llevar a cabo esta conversación.
Because as soon as somebody uses that, it's in the reaction button. It says raise your...
Hay un botoncito abajo que dice reacciones y ahí dice levantar la mano.
And as you can see, not only does your hand go up, but you move up to the top of the screen, which means that it's obvious to us that you want to say something.
Y no nada más levantas la mano, sino que apareces en la parte alta de la pantalla, lo cual hace obvio para nosotros que quieren participar.
But if anybody, we've got 3, that's good going to get on with. If anybody...
Ya tenemos 3.
Yeah, if anybody can't find that, they can also just put in the chat that they'd like to ask something, and I'll try and keep an eye on that as well.
Si no encuentran esa opción, simplemente pueden poner algo en el chat de que quieren decir algo y voy a estar pendiente.
Stav, over to you.
Thank you,
Stav.
Akupa and
Gracias,
Parami.
Akupa y Parami.
Thank you, Akupa and Parami, for an amazing conversation. I am just buzzing with inspiration and questions. I'll try and keep it brief, but I think I'll have to go back. Sorry,
You will need to break up your sentences so that I can translate you. So ella está diciendo que la conversación fue muy buena y que quiere hacer algunas preguntas.
I wanted to ask a question around the sort of compatibility of being in politics, being engaged in these difficult and complex sort of areas, issues, occupations, whatever you want to call them, and being a Buddhist.
Quiero preguntarte algo sobre la compatibilidad de estar involucrado en política y en todas esas cosas complejas y además ser un budista.
I've been working abroad for 14 years in countries like Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Cambodia, where the governance is appalling.
Yo he estado trabajando en el extranjero, en Bangladesh, en Myanmar, Cambodia, en donde el gobierno es tremendo, terrible.
And I've come back to Australia the last 2 years and seen the comment that you made, Parami, about, you know, politics being corrupt and incompetent as turning people off.
Y bueno, luego regresé a Australia y bueno, encontré este comentario que hiciste para mí, el hecho de que en la política hay corrupción e incompetencia. Siento que eso como que desanima a la gente.
So my last comment is, I think Buddha's values are absolutely needed in politics and all areas of life. I sensed a bit of perhaps incompatibility, but that's my question. So I'll pause there. But thank you very much. It's been amazing.
Por eso siento que los principios budistas son súper esenciales, pero bueno, pues ahí dejo mi comentario a ver qué dicen.
Do you want to say anything, Akupa, about that?
¿Quieres decir algo sobre eso, Akupa?
Actually, when you were talking, a friend of mine came to mind,
Cuando hablas de todo esto, pienso en un amigo mío,
who he was a counsellor at the same time as I was, but had carried on.
Él era consejero al mismo tiempo que yo, pero él continuó.
And he just died last year.
Murió el año pasado.
But he was one of the, I really admired him because he had complete integrity.
Yo realmente lo admiraba porque tenía una increíble integridad.
Very much rooted in his community and not ambitious for himself.
Muy enraizado en su comunidad y sin ambición para sí mismo.
And I really admire the life that he led.
Y realmente yo admiraba el tipo de vida que él tenía.
I don't think I could have done that.
Yo creo que yo no hubiera podido hacer eso.
So I think it is compatible, but I think you have to have real clarity and
Entonces
yeah.
creo que sí es compatible, pero necesitas tener realmente mucha claridad.
And be really clear about, not having sort of personal ambition or trying to get something out of it.
Y tener mucha claridad con respecto a no estar tratando de obtener algo ahí para ti, no ser ambicioso de esa manera.
Also, I think you'd need to be really strongly rooted in Sangha, who you could sort of talk to about things.
Y creo que tienes que estar realmente muy bien enraizado en Sangha para que puedas hablar con la gente, ¿no?
So
Yeah.
I think it's compatible, but difficult.
Creo que es compatible, pero es difícil.
I'll maybe add something, if that's okay.
Quiero añadir algo, si está bien.
So when I lived in Spain for about 13 years, as some of you know.
Yo viví en España por más o menos 13 años, como algunos saben.
And when I decided to move back to live somewhere in the UK, I spoke to Bhante about my options.
Y cuando decidí regresar a vivir en Gran Bretaña, hablé con Bhante con respecto a mis opciones.
And one of the things that I thought about was coming back to get involved in politics.
Y una de las cosas en las que pensé fue regresar para involucrarme de nuevo en la política.
And so I talked to Bhante about that, and we had very interesting conversation.
Y hablé con Bhante sobre esto y tuvimos una conversación muy interesante.
And he was actually quite enthusiastic about the idea.
Y él realmente tenía bastante entusiasmo en esa idea.
But he had a few conditions that he thought were important.
Pero él me habló de algunas condiciones que pensó que eran importantes.
So one thing was he thought it would be easier and better in Scotland, Ireland or Wales, but not in England.
Una cosa interesante que él pensó fue que sería bueno que estuviera en Escocia, en Irlanda o Gales, pero no en Inglaterra.
And that was because they're much smaller communities.
Y eso es porque son comunidades mucho más pequeñas.
And he thought it would be easier for Buddhist values to have an influence in any of those smaller situations.
Y él pensaba que era más fácil que los valores budistas pudieran tener una influencia en estas situaciones un poquito más pequeñas.
And the other thing he said was that he thought I needed to live in a Buddhist community if I was going to do that.
Y la otra cosa que me dijo es que yo necesitaba vivir en una comunidad budista si realmente iba yo a hacer eso.
Which was very much what Akupa has just said, really.
Que es más o menos lo que acaba de decir Akupa, realmente.
And his final comment to me was, I think after 25 years in the order, perhaps you're firmly enough embedded.
Y su último comentario fue, Tal vez después de 25 años en la orden ya está suficientemente embebida.
It's actually more than 25 years, but anyway, I think the
Eran
point.
más de 25 años, pero bueno, entienden el punto.
Anyway, I decided against it for various reasons.
Y bueno, decidí no hacerlo por varias razones.
But interestingly, since I've moved back to Scotland, I have been a bit more involved in politics.
Pero bueno, de manera interesante, desde que me cambié a vivir de nuevo en Escocia, he estado más involucrada e interesada en la política.
And I can see why Banty thought a situation like Scotland would be easier.
Y, y entiendo por qué Bante pensó que una situación como Escocia podría ser más fácil.
Because I already know almost all the members of the Scottish Parliament.
Porque no nada
Personally.
más es bueno, realmente conozco casi todos los miembros del Parlamento escocés personalmente.
And some of them actually even come to me sometimes for advice.
Y algunos de ellos incluso vienen conmigo para que les dé consejo.
Because they think I am wise and calm.
Porque ellos piensan que yo soy sabia y calmada, pacífica.
So I think we can have an effect in some
Entonces,
ways and situations, yeah.
Creo que sí podemos tener un efecto de alguna manera.
But I have no intentions of becoming an actual, member of parliament or anything like it. Life is too
Pero
short.
no tengo realmente ninguna intención de convertirme en miembro del Parlamento ni nada. La vida es muy corta para eso.
Nancy, you've sat there very
Nancy.
patiently with your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. This is all wonderful.
Gracias, esto es maravilloso.
As someone in the ordination training process, I, of course, always ask myself, is this the right order for me or not?
Como alguien que está en el proceso de ordenación, a veces me pregunto, ¿esta es la orden correcta para mí o no?
So a huge outpouring of gratitude from me to you to find people who are encouraging Triratna to go beyond the individual level, to look at changing the world at systems level.
Y me da mucho gusto que haya personas como ustedes dentro de Triratna que nos estén ayudando a mirar hacia afuera, involucrarnos con el mundo a un nivel más como de sistemas.
And just as a quick background, I am someone who very secular. I like the Dharma door. And so Triratna's strong orientation of devotional practices and metaphorical thinking and mysticism, I've had to work very hard to make those work for me.
Solo para darles un poquito de contexto, yo llegué a Triratna desde la perspectiva más secular y el estudio del Dharma, pero el énfasis que tiene Triratna en el aspecto devocional y místico, realmente he tenido que batallar mucho con eso.
So I was thrilled as a lifelong environmentalist to recently discover the Triratna Earth Sangha.
Ah, yeah.
Y yo he sido ambientalista y recientemente descubrí la Sangha Triratna de la Tierra, que se creó recientemente.
But then when I heard Akupa and some of the Triratna Earth Sangha conferences talking about animism,
pero cuando escuché a Kupa hablando de animismo y también alguna gente de Triratna, la tierra de la Sangha de la Tierra, Triratna. Ajá.
My thoughts are, if that approach works for you and connects you to nature and motivates you to work on climate change and gives you resilience, wonderful.
Mi acercamiento a eso es, bueno, si eso te sirve y te inspira y te permite acercarte a todo el tema del ambientalismo, perfecto, maravilloso.
But please don't ask me to be receptive and take wisdom from my elders of how I should practice this way. So I'm just wondering how much animism, and Akupa did not do this, but how much that is going to be a part of Triratna's approach to environmental work?
Entonces me pregunto, ¿qué tanto va a ser el animismo, una aproximación Triratna al aspecto ambientalista? Porque a mí como que nada más no me funciona.
I don't know if you want to say anything, Akupa, or shall I respond to that?
No sé si quieres decir algo, Akupa, o yo respondo.
You could respond first, Parami.
Yeah.
Responde
It's
para mí.
interesting. Yeah. Bhante talked about animism decades ago. Like
Bhante
it was
habló de animismo hace muchas décadas,
because you find it in the Pali Canon.
porque lo encuentras en el Canon Pali.
But he was always very clear that you can take that as metaphor rather than as something that you need to literally kind of believe in.
Pero Bhante siempre dejó claro que te puedes relacionar con todo ello como una metáfora, no tanto como algo que literalmente debes creer.
And one of the things that I really like about Triratna, and there's much that I struggle with, but one of the things I really love about Triratna is the amazingly broad church that we are.
Y una de las cosas que me encanta de Triratna, y bueno, hay muchas cosas que me encantan, pero una de las cosas que más me gustan es el increíble espectro de personas que somos.
So just as an illustration, I spent a few weeks back, I spent a couple of hours with a very good friend of mine, and then a couple of hours with another different very good friend of mine.
Hace poco pasé 2 horas con una muy buena amigo o amiga y otras 2 horas con otra amiga.
Amigo.
Amigo.
And yeah. And the first friend I was talking to is really immersed in Pure Land Buddhism.
Y la primera amiga con la que estaba hablando está realmente muy inmersa en el budismo de la tierra pura.
So she's an order member. They're both members of the order.
Ambos son miembros de la orden.
But anyway, she was talking about surrender to Amitabha and giving over yourself and being immersed in this beautiful gold, you know.
Entonces una de ellas hablaba sobre rendirse a Amitabha y todo este asunto de, en fin, ¿no?
And I just thought, lovely. You know, that's very nice for her.
Y yo pensé, bueno, muy bien, está muy bien para ella.
And then my other friend is completely into nothing but the Anapanasati Sutta.
Y mi otro amigo está completamente inmerso en ninguna otra cosa más que el Sutta Anapanasati.
His only practice for over 40 years has been the mindfulness of breathing.
Su única práctica por 40 años ha sido la atención plena a la respiración.
You know, not just counting 4 stages, but that's his practice. They are both incredibly valuable, engaged members of the Triratna order, and I love that.
Y ellos son ambos miembros muy involucrados de la orden budista Triratna y me encanta eso.
So I think for some people they might find animism quite, uninspiring, and I think for many they'll just go, yeah, whatever.
Y bueno, muchas personas van a encontrar en el animismo algo muy bonito, inspirador, y otras personas van a decir, sí, bueno, ¿qué más me da?
Just to say, I think what I've been thinking about this, and
Yo he estado pensando sobre esto.
I think, in a way, the animist path that I would like to follow.
Y creo que el camino animista que a mí me gustaría seguir.
It's basically the mindfulness of breathing, metta bhavana, and the Buddha's teachings on connectedness.
Es la atención plena a la respiración, la metta bhavana y las enseñanzas budistas sobre el tema de la conexión, la interconexión.
And that combined with actually immersing ourselves in nature.
Eso combinado con la posibilidad de fundirte con la naturaleza.
Yeah.
I think in a way that's the core. And sure, there's other things you can do which are sort of play around that.
Y creo que
Um,
eso es lo que podemos hacer. Hay muchas cosas con las que podemos jugar alrededor de todo eso.
but perhaps it's more the kind of realization that we are already on an analyst path. I don't know how you feel about that.
Pero es más bien como la realización o el darnos cuenta de que ya estamos en un camino animista. No sé cómo te sientes con eso.
I'm aware Maria Jose también has her hand up. Is that okay, Nancy, if we leave it there?
Está bien que lo dejemos ahí, Nancy. Me doy cuenta que María José también tiene la mano levantada.
If Maria Jose is in Spanish, I'll translate into English if you like.
Ok.
So thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias para mí y a Cupa por esta magnífica charla. Mi
Thanks
pregunta
very
sorry.
Thank you very
Perdón.
much, Akupa and Parami, for this. It's been magnificent to listen
Thanks
to.
for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Mi pregunta realmente voy a tomar poco tiempo porque era similar a la de Stav.
My question won't take very long because it's very similar to the one we've had.
Formo parte de un pequeño grupo de economistas y politólogos internacionales y somos budistas.
I'm part of a small group of
Economists
Economists and
politicians?
politologists.
economists and politicians, and they're all Buddhist. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Y siempre estamos, y en este momento estamos en el punto de cómo podemos seguir nuestra carrera
Yeah.
siendo budista.
And right now we're at this point where we're thinking, how do we carry on with our career and our profession and Buddhism?
Estamos muy cerca a lo que tú señalaste, Akupa, no tanto por principio, sino por tiempo.
And we're a bit similar to what you said yourself, Akupa. We're getting to a point where it's not so much a principle or ideology, but just practically the time that it all takes.
Y además de tiempo, el tener una vida más simple, que
And
todo
also
sea
as well-
más simple.
Yeah, and as well as time, we'd all like to live a simpler life.
Para terminar entonces, porque ya respondiste mucho de esto.
So to finish, because you've already responded to a lot of what I'm thinking about.
Simplificar, pero no perder el tener voz en ciertos ámbitos, ¿no?
So to simplify life, but not lose out on joy.
No,
Go for
voice. To have a voice. To have a voice.
in
Or to have
maybe
a
with
voice.
governments, ¿no?
Yeah. How to simplify but still have a voice and affect
Exactly.
government, etc. Yeah. Gosh.
Pues, porque cuando tienes voz no es tan sencillo ni llevar una vida simple.
Because to be in a position where you do have a voice, it's very hard to also have a simple life.
Incluso cuando tienes tus principios claros. Si hay algún consejo, yo y mis amigas politólogas, one of them is in Newcastle, by the way, estaremos muy contentas.
So if you have any advice for myself and my group of friends, one of whom, by the way, lives in Newcastle, then we would be very grateful.
Thank you.
Well-
Muchas gracias.
And thank you.
Well, yeah, get in touch if you want. But I wish you well with that
Te
decision.
deseo que vaya bien con esa decisión.
Yeah.
And
Parami will put us in touch, perhaps.
yeah.
Quizá para mí
If
nos
you-
puede poner en contacto.
Okay, the very last question so that we can do a little bit of meditation from Joanna in Venezuela.
La última pregunta de Joana en Venezuela para que podamos hacer un poco de meditación.
Entonces, corta.
Sí, hola. Mi pregunta es cortita, solo quería saber cuáles son los libros que Akupa ha escrito. Me gustaría conocer los nombres. Esto porque, bueno, estoy terminando mi tesis de maestría, yo trabajo con plantas. No sé si Sayoti quiere traducir.
Yeah, I will.
Tú.
Akupa,
Ok.
Joanna would like to know the name of your books and where they're available because she's studying plants. That's her background.
Right.
So can we put it in the chat?
She's saying that she's writing up her master's thesis.
Okay.
Yeah, she's doing her master's degree.
It's called Saving the Earth.
Creo que está traducido, ¿verdad?
A Buddhist.
I don't think so. No, I don't think it is translated.
It's not translated, but I think it might. There might be a Spanish translation coming out, maybe next year.
No está traducido, pero es posible que el próximo año haya una traducción en español.
Ok, está bien. Lo podría intentar leer en inglés, no hay problema. Es para inspirarme a terminar de escribir mi tesis de maestría. También me conecto mucho con las plantas, así como Akupa. Entonces, eso.
Try and read it in English because it will help with my master's course that I'm doing, and also because I feel a strong connection with plant life and nature, very much as you've been saying, Akupa. So, yeah, I think if we leave it there, yeah? Lo dejamos ahí.
Lo dejamos
Gracias.
ahí.
So, Ursula, I've seen you've put stuff about Joanna Macy in the chat, and we will be doing some work that's roughly based on Joanna's stuff later on in the retreat.
Me doy cuenta que han puesto algo sobre Joanna Macy en el chat y sí, vamos a hacer algo parecido al trabajo que hace Joanna Macy más adelante en el retiro.
And Akupa, is your book available as a download? Do you know? From
Akupa,
Winchester?
¿tu libro está disponible vía digital? ¿Tú sabes? ¿Lo puedes
I think so.
bajar?
There's
Sí,
certainly
parece que sí.
there's a Kindle edition. Yeah.
Hay una
So there-
edición Kindle.
Donde si miras, Joanna, si miras en la página de Windhorse Publications, igual puedes bajarlo.
I have put the link now on the chat and on the Padlet. Ya puse el
Acá.
vínculo para el libro en el chat aquí y en el Padlet que tenemos.
Muchas gracias.
Okay, bueno, thank you everybody.
Gracias a todos.
And Sangadar is reminding us that any sessions that you missed, you can find by clicking onto that day on our resources on the webpage.
Y Sangadara nos está recordando en el chat que si perdiste alguna sesión, puedes hacer clic en la liga que viene en recursos para el día de la sesión que perdiste.
Again, the links and everything are in the chat. So you
De
can
nuevo,
save.
las ligas y todo están en el chat para que puedas extraerlas y grabarlas, salvarlas.
So, gosh, it's been a very full evening.
Entonces ha sido una tarde bastante rica,
A lot to take in and think about.
mucho para pensar, ¿no? Y para
So I
absorber.
I really want to thank you, Akupa, for coming along and just being willing to have a conversation and share your thoughts and ideas.
Entonces te quiero nada más agradecer, Akupa, por venir a la sesión y está dispuesto a tener esta conversación y compartir tus ideas.
And Sadajoti,
Y
thank you
gracias,
so much.
Sadajoti, por la traducción. Gracias para mí.
You've ended up with quite an hour and a half constant translation. It's a lot.
Has terminado con una traducción de 1 hora y media que es bastante tremenda.
Also with different voices and
Y con diferentes voces y demás.
And I think Paul has managed to record the Spanish. Yeah. So it will be available not only as an English audio file, but there will also be a Spanish language version
Nos
available.
parece que Pau logró grabar la parte de la traducción simultánea, entonces la sesión va a estar disponible también con la traducción simultánea en español.
So, shall we finish together just sitting in meditation? Just sitting
Entonces
quietly?
vamos a terminar juntos simplemente sentándonos a meditar.
And then I'll play the video again. That's the chanting of the Pali Metta Sutta with some images of Amitabha.
Y después vamos a escuchar el video del canto en Pali y vamos a ver algunas imágenes de Amitabha.
And I have downloaded it now, so we should not have the same technical problems we had yesterday evening.
Y ahora sí bajé el asunto, así es que no vamos a tener el mismo tipo de problemas técnicos que tuvimos ayer en la tarde.
Because yeah, anyway. Yeah, so just to remind you, some of you have got a whole day ahead of you. In Australia, it must be early morning for you now.
Algunos
So
en
you've-
Australia todavía tienen todo un día por delante porque debe ser la mañana, tempranito en Australia.
So I hope this has given you food for thought to take into your day.
Entonces espero que esto les esté dando alimento para reflexionar durante su día.
And in Mexico, it's mid-afternoon.
Y en México es media tarde sí.
So I hope this gives you things to think about and meditate on for the rest of your day.
Espero que esto les haya dado cosas en las cuales reflexionar para el resto de tu día.
And I think the same for those of you in the US of A.
Y
It's
creo que lo mismo
afternoon.
sucede para las que están en Estados Unidos.
And I don't know if Zoe's with us at the moment because I think it's quite late in Singapore. So I
Y
think
no sé si Zoe está con nosotros, pero creo que es bastante tarde en Singapur. Y en
and
Venezuela para mí. Y en Venezuela tenemos a
Venezuela, it's late afternoon, yeah.
para las venezolanas ya es la tarde, bastante tarde en la tarde.
So I really like the fact that we're all at different time zones and we're all in different parts of the world, but we're all sitting here together with Metta.
Me gusta que estemos en diferentes partes del mundo, en diferentes zonas horarias, pero que estemos aquí sentados juntos en Meta.
And here in the UK and for people in Berlin, other parts of Europe, it's getting quite late.
Y para nosotros aquí en Gran Bretaña y para algunos en Europa, en Berlín, ya se está haciendo tarde.
Well, not very, very late, but it's definitely kind of late evening now.
No muy, muy tarde, pero sí ya es así como que la nochecita.
So when we finish, after we hear the chant, the same as yesterday evening session, we'll just leave in silence. So really trying to get a sense of being on retreat.
Entonces, al igual que hicimos ayer, cuando terminemos el canto, nos vamos a ir en silencio, realmente tratando de mantener una atmósfera de retiro.
And don't forget, if you want to put things on the Padlet, that's available. And it's lovely to go and see things that have been written there. So.
Y no te olvides que si quieres poner algo en el Padlet, pues realmente es muy bonito entrar al Padlet y ver lo que han estado poniendo.
And you can save the chat if you want to. There's some really nice things in there. Akupa has a beautiful voice. Thank you, all three of you.
Y pueden guardar todo lo que está en el chat, porque hay algunas cosas bonitas que se dijeron ahí, como por ejemplo que Akupa tiene una voz muy bonita.
Okay, let's just sit quietly for it'll be very short, just 5 minutes or so, and then I'll put on the video, which is about 5 minutes, and then we can just finish and wave goodbye to each other.
Entonces vamos a sentarnos, ya no queda mucho tiempo, 5 minutitos sentados, 5 minutitos que dura el video, y simplemente al final decimos adiós con la manita y nos vamos.
And remember, your homework is still, still have to look after yourself and do something nice for yourself before you go to bed.
Y la tarea sigue siendo cuidarte a ti mismo, a ti misma, y hacer algo bonito para ti antes de que te vayas a la cama el día de hoy.
And thank you, Sangadara, for all your work.
Y gracias, Sangadara, por todo tu trabajo.
Okay, so if you'd just like to close your eyes and just let yourself relax into
Si deseas Desea cerrar tus ojos y simplemente relájate y entra en quietud.
Just letting all the words and the conversations and the thoughts and the ideas, just let them go like clouds in the sky.
Y deja que todas estas conversaciones, ideas, palabras vayan yéndose como las nubes en el cielo.
So we'll end by hearing the chant of the Metta Sutta and just seeing some images of Amitabha.
Entonces vamos a terminar escuchando el canto del Metta Sutta y viendo algunas imágenes de Amitabha.
Karyaniyana kushalena yantam santam padam abisha mecha, saku uju cha suju cha, suva chocha samudu anatimani. Santu sako cha subaro cha, apaki cho cha salahu kavuti. Santi drio cha nipako cha, apagaboku lesu ananuguido. Nacha kudam samachari kinchi, yena venu pare upavadeyum. Sukino va kemino hontu, sabe sata bhavantu sukitata. Yeke chipana bhutati, tasavatavara vaanavasesa. Digavaye mahantava, majimarasaka anukatula. Ditavaye vadita, ye chadure vasan ti avidure. Bhutavasam bhavesiva, sabe sata bhavantu sukitata. Naparo param nikubeta, nati manyeta kata china kanchi. Yaro sanya pantiga sanya, nana manya sasa dukamichiya. Matayatani putam, ayusaeka putamunaraki. Ivan pisa babutesu, manasambhavaye aparimanyam. Metanchasa balokasmim, manasambhavaye aparimanyam. Udamado chatiryancha, asabadamavar amasapatam. Titam charam nisinova, sayanuvayava tasavigatam ido. Itam satim aditeya, brahmamitam viharam idamahu. Ditan cha anupagama, silavadasanen asampano. Kamesu vinyagidan, nahi jatu gabe seyam punareti. Ti.